to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and Happy New Year. I'll have the clerk please call the roll.
Supervisor Fountain? Here. Clerk Chofiu? Here. Treasurer Horning?
Here.
Trustee Coliang?
Here.
Trustee Germain?
Here.
Trustee Harper?
Here.
Trustee Petrucci?
Here.
Thank you. Item number 4 is approval of our agenda.
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Treasurer Horning, second by Trustee Germain. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Call to the public this evening. Anybody here for call to the public? Being none, we'll move on to item number 6, which is approval of our consent agenda.
So moved. Support.
Have a motion by Trustee Kalani, second by Trustee Harper. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Item number 7 this evening, we have a presentation by Cobalt Community Research. This is something we've done every 2 or 3 years since 2012, I believe.
Yep.
And I believe we have, is it Bill?
It is, yep.
Good evening. And James, would you like to just kind of say a few words as to how this is going to progress?
Yeah, I think the presentation will set the table pretty well. Last citizen survey we did was in 2015. We were going to do it last year, but had to move it for budget reasons, and did the first one in 2012. But happy to introduce Will Sainamore from Cobalt Community Research.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again. I could take about 2 hours to go through all the statistics with you, but I will try to make this very brief. If you have questions, stop me, and I'm happy to dive into them, but I will try to keep it moving along so that you can get finished up on time tonight. So briefly, just a reminder about Cobalt and who we are. We are a 501c3. We're based here in Michigan, but we work around the country doing these kinds of studies. Why research matters? There's a number of reasons that your citizens have a lot of value from this kind of effort. One is it helps you just keep your hands on the pulse of what the values are of the community, what their priorities are, if there's concerns, really catching those things early as they emerge on a statistical standpoint. Helps you manage behaviors that you care about. So perception is reality, we've all heard that, but the reason why is because there's certain behavioral outcomes to that, like remaining in the community, recommending it to others, encouraging others to move into the community, those types of things. So those are the way that our model is put together is really looking at how much impact the satisfaction in different areas and the experiences people have on those outcome behaviors. Helps you improve and promote the township. It gives you support for difficult decisions that you might be looking at, balance some of the louder or the more articulate voices with a representation of what the entire community wants, and it's just generally a good bottom line measurement for trust and relationship building. So what we want to do with this particular study is, again, support your budget and strategic planning goals. We wanted to gather the feedback and build on what we've done in the last 2 surveys, one in 2012 and one in 2015. We wanted to look at the kind of improvements that you made over time and where things might have softened a little bit from an experience standpoint, and also do some benchmarking against some standardized indices out there so you can see how well you perform to other communities that are your size across the state, and also how you compare to communities across the Midwest and across the U.S. overall. So bottom line, this slide is a little hard to read. I believe you've got it in your packet that you received. One of the measures that we use is the American Customer Satisfaction Index out of the University of Michigan's Ross Business School. And it's on a scale of 0 to 100, with 100 being a perfect score that no community ever gets. Your 2015 score was a 74, which is very solid. And your 2019 score declined just 1 point, which is within the margin of error, 73. And to give you a sense of how that compares, you can see Michigan overall has a score of 63 for individual communities, in the Midwest 62, and national 61. So the fact that you are well above those benchmarks overall bodes well for you. The next chart, which is the one that's kind of hard to read, is looking at your scores over time and also against these various benchmarks. So your 2012 scores, 15 and 19, and it's giving you the overall category scores in each of these areas. And the things that are highlighted in green are the things that are the most impactful for your scores. They have the most leverage on moving your score up or down. So it's not necessarily that they're bad scores or good scores, it's just that those are the ones that have the most bang for the buck. And then over on the far right-hand side, you can see how the scores changed compared to 2015. For the most part, they stayed very stable. I'm just going to look at the green areas. You can see that public schools were stable. You can see that police, which is one of the strong drivers, went up by 4 points, which is a significant movement. You can see that the shopping opportunities actually dropped down a bit, and that's something that you'll see in the data a little bit more comments regarding that. Local government did a little bit, but not enough to be statistically significant. And then you've had some growth in both the economic health and the parks and recreation. Both of those are areas that count, and they're areas that went up. So overall, a very good picture in terms of how well you compare to the benchmarks and how well you compare to yourself over time. So I like to talk about the bottom line, just so that you don't skip to the end of the presentation. First of all, road repair and improvement was the highest rated item. That's something that people are concerned about. From a zoning standpoint, we had some questions regarding that, and there is a lot of interest in stronger regulations for properties in disrepair. And then you've got the detail that can support that as well. Development, people would like more focus on some residential development, although when we looked at the comments, there were a lot of comments regarding restaurants, particularly independent restaurants, so not necessarily fast food kind of things, but more of the quality sit-down kind of places. Police services, as I mentioned, those went up significantly, and people really want to maintain the service levels at the same level as neighboring communities, so keeping that pretty consistent with where it is. And then we looked at some potential millage questions, and the majority do support fire and road millages, so we'll get into more detail on that as well. Okay. One of the things in your packet is this crosstab, and it's a wonderful eye chart here. It's designed to not be readable, and we're always successful with that. What I want to do with this is just talk about how to read this chart. If you look across the top, this is just a tiny snippet of it, but every question in the survey is listed at the top of these columns. Then every demographic group that we use in the survey is a row. So if you bring those down, you can see for each individual cohort, each demographic group, how they rated that particular question. At a very high level, if you just kind of look at where the shading is, you can see areas that are more blue. Those are telling you where your strengths are, where the highest scores are. You can also see areas that are more red. Those are showing you where the scores are lower. And if you drop down a row and you see it's pretty consistently blue, that tells you that regardless of demographic group, people have pretty consistent experiences and pretty consistent perceptions of the community. If you see areas where it's a bit more mixed, that means that there's some demographic groups that have different opinions. And so as you're out there in the community, as you're in the grocery store chatting with folks, this will help you understand what kind of more pointed questions to maybe ask people. Instead of just generally, how are things in the township, you can ask them specifically about that particular question if they're in the demographic group that rated it a little bit more low. So it's a very useful tool for doing that kind of thing. Briefly on the methodology, it was the same thing that we've done in the past, 1,500 residents. They were from voter records, randomly selected so that it is representative. We did it in October and November. They all had a survey ID number to make sure that it was statistically valid. We had 342 people respond, which is excellent, compared to the last survey, which was 345. So it was almost identical, and the distribution was almost identical as well. The margin of error is plus or minus 5%. The ACSI, which has a little bit of a different methodology for looking at some of those core questions, is plus or minus 2%. One of the things that often is asked is, for a community our size, is that sample large enough to be representative? And for a representative sample of the entire U.S. with 330 million people, you only need 384 responses to be statistically representative. So you're in very good shape from that standpoint. One difference that we had in terms of the response pattern is that we had a little bit of a higher representation of long-term residents compared to the last survey. So that's one thing that when you're looking at the crosstabs, you can pay attention to the residency, and sometimes there's a little bit of a difference between the experiences of longer-term residents and folks who haven't been here as long. Okay, the model, I talked about that a little bit at the beginning. Basically, the way it works is there's certain outcome behaviors that we try to look at how you can optimize. Those are remaining in the community, recommending to others, volunteering, encouraging businesses to start up in the community, supporting the current administration, and community image. And those are driven by the experience, and the experience in turn, the citizen satisfaction is driven by these experiences across these different domains. And so we'll go into the ones that are the strongest drivers. So on the slides, you will see several different columns. You've got this light gray, the dark gray, and the blue. So these are looking at the Heartland scores from 2012, 2015, and 2019. And then you have this pale green, which is Michigan for similarly sized communities. You've got the darker green, which is Michigan overall. You've got the Midwest and kind of this orangey yellow US for similarly sized communities, and the pink, or as my daughter says, who doesn't like pink, it's light red. And then for the darker red, that's the US overall. So at the high level, looking at your ACSI scores, looking at the 3 questions that comprise it, overall satisfaction, how well you're meeting their expectations, how well you're meeting residents' vision of an ideal community, you are well above the benchmarks in each of these areas. Looking at those outcome behaviors, you can see recommended a place to live. Again, you're outperforming the benchmarks, trending up. Remain in the community, same thing. Plan to volunteer, you can see this kind of dropping down a bit. So that's something that if you're thinking about developing a volunteer program, this is a useful baseline that you can look at as you roll that out. Encourage businesses to start up, really right about at the benchmarks, above the Michigan benchmark for similarly sized communities. And then support government administration, again, you're well above the benchmark. And this is probably one of the hardest ones to read. I'm not going to go over it in detail, but this is looking at the different components of community image, such as safe place to live, enjoyable place for children, and so on. There's a couple of them that I just wanted to pull out real quick. One is physically attractive and curb appeal. It's one of your lower rating areas, but you're well above the benchmarks, but there were some comments regarding that with the blight. A safe place to bike and walk. You can see that that was a very low score, trending upward. It's something that comes up in other areas of the survey, but it's not really a driver for you. So it is a lower scoring area, but it's not the thing that people are the most concerned about. All right, let's look at the drivers. So the way that this chart works is your highest rating areas are in the top, your relatively lower rating areas are in the bottom. And if you look at the scale, it starts at a 43. This goes from 0 to 100, but you can see your lowest score is still nearly at a 50. So it's transportation. And so you can see that, we're really looking at optimizing what kind of choices you make in terms of driving those outcome behaviors that you're after. So top is high, bottom is low. The right, things further to the right have more impact on those outcome behaviors. So if you're looking at people remaining in the community, for example, things like the economy, the schools, parks and recreation, those are things that have much more impact in terms of helping people to stick and to recommend than something like currently the library, the fire department, taxes and events. So as you're looking at kind of future budgets, as you're thinking about different programs to put in place, this can kind of give you a sense of what are the things that are going to move the needle the most, at least in those areas. Things that are over on the left-hand side, it does not mean that they're not important. These are certainly important things. It just means that currently they're optimized for where you are. So improving these further really isn't going to have much effect on the outcomes that you're trying to drive to, as opposed to these things over here, whether it's high and you're building on your strengths, or whether it's something that's relatively lower scoring, that's more of your weaknesses. It just depends on the strategy you want to take to move forward. This next slide is just taking a look at those same ratings compared to 2015. And some movement that I wanted to point out. You can see that parks went up and became more meaningful. Your schools became more impactful, and your police went up and became more impactful. Economy was a lot lower back then. It stabilized, it went up, and it became less important, which is often what we see is the scores rise, they become kind of less of the raw spot for a community. Shopping went down, local government management became less impactful.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about how transportation is calculated, or was it considering public transportation, or?
So there's,
are breaking down, or?
yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit, but there's a number of questions that are part of the transportation. So this is just transportation overall, but there are a number of questions within it. And actually, if
That's been low for us every time.
yes. And it's becoming more impactful, too. So even though it hasn't crossed that line yet, it's having more and more of an effect on your overall scores. That's probably why your score went down just at one point, is probably some of the concerns regarding that, especially looking at the comments that were more focused on road conditions specifically.
So if you can just help me understand the graph as well. So if you look at like fire, police, parks and rec and schools,
Yep.
all of those balls started in the top left-hand side, and they've all moved over into the top right-hand side. What does that, what does the data tell us?
Yeah, it's an effect that we often see. It's kind of like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, that as certain base needs get addressed, then people start focusing on things that are a little bit higher, like parks and arts and those kind of things. And so what you see over here is the economy in particular improving. And as you see the economy improve, you see some of these other things becoming a bit more impactful as a result.
But on the satisfaction, each one of those were about as high of a mark as you could get.
Right.
So does that correlate to this? Or is this a different way of looking at it?
Maybe if you looked at it on the other side, that if the scores are high now, and if they were to drop, they would have a detrimental effect. So it's really things that are over on this side are optimized. Things over here, if you went up, they would continue to improve your score. But if they went down, they would worsen your score. So they have more leverage on.
Does that correlate to people willing to spend money to achieve those?
Some of these, yes. Yep, when we get into the millage and that
Okay.
kind of thing. One of the things, for example, is taxes, looking at fairness of tax levels. Even though, the score went down on taxes, it became less impactful. So while nobody likes to pay taxes, there is a willingness to pay for some of the things that they want to see, particularly the police and fire, the roads.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the questions that we've asked every year is looking at potential zoning changes and to see if the level of regulation is adequate based on the needs of the residents. And you can read each of these pretty much as a pie chart. So blue means that residents think you should reduce the restrictions, make them less cumbersome. Green means keep it about the same. Red means they want you to increase the restrictions. Generally, the majority of folks are in that green zone, with one exception, which is looking at the properties in disrepair. So dealing with some of the blight issues that are cropping up here and there. Related to that is the grass and noxious weeds. Not as high, but often the two are linked.
Are we talking about like Phragmites there?
Pardon?
Or is that, do you think that's?
Just tall grass.
Just tall grass?
It's neighbor complaints.
Oh, neighbor complaints,
Yeah.
okay. Just curious where we were on that spectrum. So, okay.
And Bill, a lot of these questions were asked at the last two surveys, correct?
Yes, correct.
In your data somewhere, do you have these charted next to each other?
We do, and actually they're shared with staff.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have that if you're interested.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on this particular graph? Local government management. So these are a number of dimensions related to local government. Again, overall, you're above the benchmark, so that's an important thing to point out. Pretty stable for the most part. A couple of areas that I did want to point out. One is the money wisely spent is a bit lower than other areas. When we look at the comments, some of the comments were about the prior road millage. So people approved a millage and they haven't seen as much impact as they would like to see. So that could be one of the elements to it. The other thing that often is tied in with the money wisely spent is the communication regarding the decision-making process. And so often boards don't do the best job communicating how that process works and how those decisions are made. And so folks just kind of take their general bias against government and basically paint all governments with that. And so that's another thing that tends to make that score a little bit lower. Hours of operation township office, those are not asked at the benchmarks, but were scored very highly. Business-friendly regulations and processes scored pretty well, not as high as some of the other areas. Use of Township Hall, how often do people use it in the course of the year? Most people, 1 to 6 times. Budget priorities, what are people, what do they want you to have as the budget priorities going forward? So road maintenance, far and above the number one thing. Then the next tier of things that are all pretty much equal over here on the left-hand side, law enforcement, fire response, emergency medical, and paving new roads. Looking at your parks and recreation, again, they're above the benchmarks, and again, they're trending up. So those are in good shape. Police services, also generally above the benchmarks, generally trending up. We also looked at the level of safety that they feel in the community. That's not part of the benchmarking, but that's doing well. Coverage from the county, you can see that that has significantly gone up in terms of the ratings there. Coverage by Michigan State Police, that's gone up as well. Response time to emergencies, it was pretty low back in 2012, and you can see it's come up to be pretty consistent with the benchmarks. So we gave them a number of options regarding public safety, particularly around the police. And I put these 4 charts together just so you can see the relative rating. So we have folks, they strongly disagree, they disagree, neutral, support, strongly support. And when we give them the different options, keeping the patrol at the same level as neighboring townships, you can see that most people are supportive or strongly supportive of that. So that's really kind of the sweet spot in a number of these questions. We looked at contracting to increase police services. You can see not as much support for increasing it. We looked at starting your own police department, not a lot of support for doing that. And then voting on a millage to fund increased police services, that's an area where people really didn't want to prioritize that as a spending option. There's other things that they wanted to spend the dollars on. Fire services, very solid, right at the benchmarks. Operating millage. So you have about 53% that support a potential fire operating millage. You've only got about 22% that oppose it, a number of folks who are undecided. So you're in a strong place. If this is something that you want to pursue, I think there's a lot of folks that are open to that possibility.
And this was asked as the potential increase that had been talked about, not as a simple renewal. This was giving them just a paragraph of information to consider on an increase, and that's where it scored.
So a good place to start on this particular question. Looking at transportation, specifically transportation overall, you can see pretty consistent with last year or last round, but well below the benchmarks overall. When we look at road maintenance, this is really a key thing. You are below the benchmarks. You're actually above Michigan, but still below the benchmarks. Traffic free of congestion, you can see that that's dropped down quite a bit as well. So really this is where that concern was coming from, is the road maintenance, the congestion, the bicycle and foot traffic. I talked about that a little bit at the beginning. You can see that it is increasing, but that really wasn't a driver when we got into things more deeply. Looking at potential road millage. So what sort of things to include in a potential renewal? So we asked folks, what would they like to see in that? And you can see that overall, maintenance and repairs on township paved roads, including repairing and resurfacing roads, you have 70%. So very strong read on that. Paving over graveled roads in high traffic areas, and then maintenance and repairs on township gravel roads. So those are your big 3.
Really?
When we look at support for the renewal millage, you're starting off with about 58% or so, only about 16% opposed, number of folks undecided that are open but need more information. So again, you're in a pretty strong spot regarding this particular question.
When's the current road millage up?
In '24, we've talked about renewing maybe in '22
Would it begin in 2024?
to start to renew in '24, just for the timing.
One of the things that we did in the analysis was looked at people's positions, so whether they support, oppose, or are undecided, and then looked at those different questions of what kind of things to include, so that when we looked at the people who are supportive, what are the things that are at the top of their wish list in terms of to include in it? And you can see maintenance and repairs, the paving over the gravel roads, and the maintenance and repairs on the gravel roads are the big three, as we saw on the prior slide. For people who oppose, those things didn't come up very often, except for the maintenance and repairs on the paved roads. Even though that wasn't quite a majority, that's still something that resonated with that particular cohort. And that's also the piece that resonated the most with the folks who are undecided, along with the paving over the gravel roads. So when you're looking at developing this, certainly emphasizing the paving over the gravel roads in high-traffic areas and the maintenance and repairs are the things to focus on the most. We had some questions regarding trash and recycling services. So one of the questions is, who's your current hauler? To get a sense of what the market looks like. You can see Doogie's disposal and recycling is nearly 50% of your market, followed by GFL. And the rest of the folks kind of fighting over that last little bit. Similar to the last one, we asked how likely or unlikely are people to support a potential single hauler program. And so the way that you read this is, again, like a pie chart, and you want to look at how much blue there is, essentially. That's showing you how much support for each of these areas. Gray is on the fence, and then red is in opposition. So we asked them essentially, what are the things that would make you most likely to support? And so you can see these things in the middle. These give you the most blue right here, which is keep your current household cost the same, or even decreasing your household cost, and then include occasional large item pickup in the service. So those are three big features that make this more supportable. Looking at communications, from a branding standpoint, interested in who do they call home, Heartland or the city that they're closer to. And you can see that far and away, Heartland is the thing that most folks call home. So there's strong identification with this community. And then we had a section for additional comments to help guide planning. And the way that this works, the words that came up the most in the comments are the largest in this particular word cloud. We then took those to see what are the themes around the words. So you can see roads, very large. And this, again, gravel roads in poor repair, grade more often, hasn't gotten better with the millage. Those were the kind of themes that we saw regarding the road word. Restaurants, need more restaurants, more variety, craft breweries, those kind of things. No more fast food, they're good on that. And then paved came up pretty often as well, so more dirt roads should be paved. So there's a lot of development in this area and a lot of traffic.
I think part of that is what the success of Haggard Road. I think people, that was such a long time. It was a gravel road, and I think people have traveled that, don't you think? I mean, it's right off 59. So.
I think the other factor would be the fact that MDOT rebuilt a large portion of M59 in Oakland County this year, and a lot of Heartland residents were driving down Pleasant Valley to get to their destinations.
Oh, good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it. That's right. And it was, because I see that all the time. So that could use another gravel or paved. That one house that has to probably go is for sale right now, where they need to straighten out that Esker. It's for sale right now. I don't know if the road commission knows that, but.
So one of the last things I mentioned is that, these are perceptions. Sometimes perceptions are accurate, sometimes they aren't. There's two kinds of gaps that could be the result of the perceptions that residents are sharing. One is just that it is truly just a perception gap. Reality is different, and you close that with communication and education and outreach, those kind of things. And sometimes you have a real performance gap. So something is broken, needs to be repaired. And once you've repaired it, then that particular gap then turns into a perception gap, because people never forget an issue until you tell them that it's resolved. They still might not believe you, even if it's resolved. But once you fix something, it's important that you then put the communication behind it so that people do know that they were heard, the situation was addressed and that things are better now. And then one of the things that we often talk about as well is just this improvement cycle, which is looking at the measurements, which you've been doing, really taking time once you've had a chance to digest them and brainstorm, why did people respond the way they did, and listing those out. And also listing out some of the potential changes that you could make going forward that you think would help move the needle and address some of these concerns going forward, or to build on your successes. Step 3 is the validation, which is really pulling in line staff, pulling in resident work groups, sharing that idea, that list of potential ideas with them, saying, okay, what makes the most sense? What would help move the needle the most? What are we missing that should be on this list that isn't? Training, whoever's going to be implementing it, make sure they have the skills and tools to do that. And then the actual implementation, resourcing it, identifying timeline, and then coming back again in a few years and measuring to see, have you addressed the things that you wanted to address, and have resident priorities shifted as the economy and the other things shift as well. So that concludes this overview. Again, it's a pleasure to work with the township. So folks love living here. They had a lot of great comments to share. So you're doing very well. And that doesn't happen accidentally. I've worked with a number of communities where the story isn't quite this solid. And so you're doing a good job, and residents appreciate it. Any questions?
I do have just a general question. I know this is what you do for a living, so you probably have a lot of other communities that you do this on a same type of a cycle that you do here.
Sure.
What are the trends on some of the things that you saw here that, like trustworthiness and stuff like that? What are the overall trends when it comes to some of those things? It just seems to me that the political climate has changed an awful lot in the last 4 years.
Yeah, it
And
has.
the divisiveness and all those types of things, and the antitrust that the sentiment that has to go around. I just wonder if there are trends and patterns that are more broad-based than what people look at us as the driving force to a number of things outside our scope.
There are a number of things that drive that in a broader perspective. As far as the general kind of public temperament, I think a lot of that depends on the relationship that the local government has with the residents. Some local units of government are better at the communication and being out there and being a part of the community than others. Some are very standoffish, and it shows in the numbers. And others are more, they roll up their sleeves and they're out there, and people know who they are. And there's good communication. I snagged one of your newsletters, for example. I mean, a newsletter is a very simple thing, but you'd be surprised how many communities don't take time to do it. And yet when we do the evaluation to see, what are the communication channels that matter the most, this is one of the most important ones that people appreciate. So there's that. One of the things that we noticed is that scores on trust and spending dollars wisely and those kind of things are influenced by the wider political environment. Even within Michigan, we really saw it strongly when Kwame Kilpatrick was going through all of those issues in Detroit. Even outside of Detroit, everyone in Southeast Michigan, you saw those scores drop, even though they're the same people. They're doing very good jobs for the most part, but just that broad brush kind of painted everyone. So yes, that is a factor. That's one reason that we do the benchmarks every year, so that you can see, compared, kind of like a stock index, everything is moving. So are you going above the benchmarks, or are you going below the benchmarks? And so it gives you a tool to kind of see that. Not if you go down 1 point, but the benchmarks drop 5, you've done really well.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from board members?
I just have a question. From your experience, what are some of the techniques or procedures that other communities have used to share this information with the public?
There's 2 approaches that I've seen used most often. One is they just take the information and they put up at least the summary presentation online, and then if people have questions or want to come in and talk about the detailed information, then they share that. That's probably the most common approach. Another approach is using it more as a tool for your strategic communications, and that as you go through the results, maybe you share the results or the details of the results a little at a time, and each time you share it, you're including in what are your key talking points for the community, what are the key goals that you're trying to address, so that instead of just one big bite of the apple, you can provide many smaller bites that helps people become aware of the messaging that you're trying to get out. So it's a nice way of hooking the survey into those broader talking points and using those as a tool to help drive that value out into the community.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, on behalf of our board, thank you again.
It's my pleasure.
Yes.
My pleasure. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a wonderful evening
Yep.
and a wonderful 2020.
Moving on to item number 8A, it's a resolution in support for Wings et cetera liquor license. This is a new business that's coming into our community. It's located at the old library. And James, you want to just explain just briefly that this is what we're supporting this business for?
Yeah, they're transferring in a liquor license. We don't have any more quota licenses to give, and they've located one to transfer in. With the new state law a few years ago, it does not require local approval, but the administrative committee did discuss, and the board has previously discussed interest and support for this business and any small business owner investing in the community. This is a resolution just to demonstrate that support, keeping with our business-friendly efforts.
Move to approve the resolution of support for Wings, et cetera.
Support.
Motion by Treasurer Horny, second by Trustee Harper. Is there any discussion? Being none, I'll have the clerk please call the roll.
Trustee Collier.
Yes.
Clerk Schofield, yes. Supervisor Fountain.
Yes.
Trustee Jermaine.
Yes?
Treasurer Horning.
Yes.
Trustee Petrucci.
Yes.
Trustee Harper.
Yes.
Thank you. Our next item is an MDOT M59 pathway agreement. This is near the old high school. James, I think you're going to put this up on the big screen so people at home can see where it's going to be located. And James, I think I'll turn this over to you or Bob as to what the scope of this project's going to be and where the sidewalk maybe is going to go if it's not too confusing on here.
These drawings will be confusing, but generally speaking, on M59 between Cullen Road east to near the old high school, folks that drive westbound on that road know that there's a through lane and there's a second through lane, the right, sort of a right turn lane, passing lane there. And MDOT had studied the area and was concerned with a number of accidents happening there from folks that are at the last minute jumping into that passing lane and other people already being there and things like that. So they're turning that stretch into a dedicated center left turn lane and then creating just one through lane in each direction. And so with that improvement, which is not a major project, they'll bring it up to standard, they have offered to pave, fill in a gap sidewalk at Heartland Woods Drive. And so the agreement before you is just for them to agree to do it, and then us agree to take it over and as a sidewalk in our system. That's the short version.
I'll move to approve the MDOT agreement for the proposed M59 pathway as presented.
Support?
Motion by Trustee Kalani, second by Trustee Jermaine. Is there any other comments?
Just to note that
Questions?
there's no cost to the township for the construction of this. And so
And the
no
other
budget
question I
amendments
had
required.
would be the timing of this project. Obviously, it's going to be sometime in 2020.
Targeting the summer of 2020, yes.
Okay. Very good. Is there any other questions? Being none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 8C is a zoning amendment, number 19-003, maintenance of sidewalks and pathways.
This zoning amendment is in line with the ordinance repeal that you did previously, I believe at the last meeting for the sidewalk ordinance. There's a small section of the zoning ordinance that also spoke of it. Really, that should be addressed in a police powers ordinance anyway. There was a public hearing on this at the Planning Commission, and that was published. They recommended repealing that. The County Planning Commission agreed, and it's before your consideration.
Move to approve this outlined in the memorandum and resolution, the zoning amendment 19-003 maintenance of sidewalks and pathways.
Second.
A motion by trustee Kalani and a second by treasurer Horning. Any discussion? Have the clerk please call the roll.
Trustee Petrucci?
Yes.
Trustee Harper?
Yes.
Treasurer Horning?
Yes.
Trustee Collier?
Yes.
Trustee Germain?
Yes.
Supervisor Fountain?
Yes.
Clerk Chofiu? Yes.
Thank you. And item number 8D is a resolution for an easement acquisition.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Just that in the title work that they did for that easement, you saw the information that a couple of easement holders were missing that just need notification, so we need to start the process over again. For
Move
this.
to approve the resolution for the easement acquisition.
Support.
Motion by trustee Kalani, second by trustee Harper. Any discussion?
I think this is a resolution for the, to also present good faith offer, correct?
To represent the same one to all the parties, yeah.
Correct.
Would you like to amend your motion?
Well,
No, it's in the
It's in
writing.
the
It's in there.
resolution.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion? Being none, I'll have the clerk please call the roll.
Supervisor Fountain?
Yes?
Trustee Germain?
Yes.
Clerk Chofiu? Yes. Trustee Petrucci?
Yes.
Trustee Harper?
Yes.
Treasurer Horning?
Yes.
Trustee Collier?
Yes.
Thank you. And we'll move on to item number 9, which is board reports. And our first meeting of the year, start with Clerk Shofu,
No report.
Treasurer Horning,
Nothing.
Trustee Kalani.
Nothing, but Happy New Year to everyone in the township and township board.
Trustee Germain.
I would like to defer my time to Robert West so that he can provide an update to the board on the construction at the teen center hoop house building.
Absolutely, thank you. Currently, what we're doing is securing the quotes from some recommended contractors in the area. They're local contractors. I believe one gentleman is retired, if I'm not mistaken. So unfortunately, both of them were kind of tied up. This is the end of the year season. They are both willing to do the work at a more economical cost to the township. However, they're just kind of winding down their 2019 projects, and then, of course, the holidays came through. So I have reached out to them, and they are both still working on their quotes, trying to get their parts list together, and we should have those numbers to us shortly.
And the two things that need to be done are?
We are installing a natural gas line from the teen center basement, so it'll feed off the same meter and essentially optimize the use of a heater in that facility. And the second one is an electrical service, which will also be fed from the teen center. So it will not be a separate gas or electric meter. They will both be metered off the existing utility meters. So.
And then the only thing I think you said that I take exception to is that it's not a township expense. It will be a hero expense.
I stand corrected, and I apologize.
Good. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Trustee Harper,
No report.
Trustee Petrucci.
No report.
I don't have anything this evening, so we'll take a brief recess, and we'll go into our work session to discuss revenue projections, our 2019 financial report, and our manager's report.
Everybody remember to leave their laptops here tonight.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I was going to remind you,
Leave.
managers, if
Yeah.
you want your laptop